If you went through the American educational system, you probably have encountered John Gast's famous painting of Manifest Destiny, American Progress. This used to be taught in a celebratory way, although less so today. In this picture, we see Native Americans and animals fleeing from the light and into the dark, scary, wild American West. In other words, from the future into the past. In the middle, Miss Columbia, the female personification of the United States, referencing Christopher Columbus, brings railroads, cultivation, telegraph lines, and civilization from the American East. This famous painting shows the broader narrative of justifying American colonization of the West, but at the same time, photographs were even more central to this process. In this video, I will use Wiliam Henry Jackson's photographs and career to show how one person contributed to this broader project of justifying American settler colonialism. I use three theoretical frameworks throughout my project: photography, Orientalism, and the concept of the white gaze. The first is on photography. We can't assume photographs are true reproductions of reality. Artists make stylistic choices of what to frame, how to frame, what gets excluded from the frame, although back then many people did believe that photographs were close, if not true, reproductions of reality. Next is Orientalism, which is essential to post-colonial studies regarding Europe, but has not been applied to the United States until now. Orientalism is a study of perceived differences between the European West and the Oriental East. The West would claim itself civilized, progressive, and enlightened, while they call the East primitive, backwards, and savage. Orientalist theory also states that knowledge on the Orient helped Europe justify its colonial rule. They argued indigenous people weren't worthy of self-rule, and Europe had to use its superior structures to help them become ready. Finally, in U.S. scholarship, the concept of the white gaze has been used to understand how white authority creates itself at the expense and oppression of others. In this period of settler colonialism, the white gaze has much overlap with Orientalism. I argue that Orientalism is a useful framework to understand American empire and relations with Native American nations. Moving westward after fighting in Union Blue, Wiliam Henry Jackson was the self-proclaimed pioneer photographer of the American West. Specializing in Indian portraits and the study of Native Americans, Jackson opened his Omaha, Nebraska photography studio in 1867. In the 1870s, Jackson worked alongside renowned geologist Ferdinand Vandiver Hayden in the U.S. Geological Survey. Jackson was considered by many Americans one of the leading experts on Native Americans. During the 1876 Centennial Exhibition and World's Fair in Philadelphia, Jackson commanded the booth at the Indian exhibit. In 1877, he published his Descriptive Catalog of North American Indians. In the years after, he worked on commission to promote various railroad lines and their destinations. Jackson's career peaked when he was hired as the official photographer of the 1893 World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago, one of the most extravagant and famous World's Fairs. After that, Jackson went abroad on a 3-year tour with the World's Transportation Commission, doing what he did best: photographing imperial technologies and the indigenous people near them. I argue that Jackson had a 5-step colonial process. First, Jackson othered Native Americans as primitive. Second, Jackson cataloged them and their land extensively. Third, he argued with his photographs the underuse of the land. Fourth, he presented Native Americans as vanished and their land is open for the taking. Finally, when he was working for railroad lines, he glorified white development. Native Americans as a primitive other. Jackson sold Indian portraits he took at his Omaha studio and on reservations, commercializing them. In his first autobiography, The Pioneer Photographer, Jackson presented Native Americans as thieves and violent savages. Whenever he would go on a trip, he protected his saddles and travel wares, waiting for thieving Indians, but they never came. To match white expectations of Native Americans, Jackson placed straw, boulders, and branches in front of a painted natural backdrop to match the imaginations of an authentic North American Indian. Jackson tended to exoticize and fetishize Native American women he came across. Said claimed that Orientalism was an exclusively male providence, where the male power and travel fantasy portrays women as creatures to be described and won. Listen to how Jackson made connections to the Orient when describing Numpayu, a Hopi woman.
She was short of stature and plump, but not unbecomingly so. Her eyes were almond shape, coal black, and possessed a voluptuous expression, which made them extremely fascinating. Her hair was arranged in that characteristic Oriental manner, peculiar to her tribe, which denoted her a maid. Her complexion was much lighter than that of her family, and every movement of her head, or exquisitely molded hands and arms, or bare little feet, was one of faultless grace.
He also saw clothing as a marker of civility or savagery. Western clothing would mean a Native American was civilized. Native clothing or nakedness would mean that they were savage. Any decorative paint was assumed to be war paint as well. When Jackson presented Native Americans as a primitive other, he asserted white society's self-proclaimed progressiveness and proper civility. Cataloging for domination. Orientalism states that the knowledge of the other is the ability to control the other. In 1877, Jackson released his descriptive catalog of photographs of North American Indians. He was considered an expert on Native Americans. In it are his evaluations of each Native American nation, their brief histories with respect to the U.S. government, and there are over 1,000 entries about different individuals. Jackson implicitly placed Native Americans into two categories, good and bad. Native people who assimilated and took up white clothing, labor, and social practices were good, while those who refused to have him photograph them, or kept their own native culture, were deemed primitive, ignorant, and unwilling to learn. This is Jackson again saying, if we are modern, scientific, and civilized, these people are not. Listen to how Jackson describes one of the thousands of people in his descriptive catalog.
He has a reputation for being a miserable, worthless Indian, unwilling to work and adhering with great tenacity to the heathenish customs of his tribe.
The vanishing race in the Promised Land. White America held a common myth that the American West was open for the taking, much like John Winthrop and his shining City on a Hill 200 years prior. Jackson played on this myth when photographing open landscape, and these photos argue that this terra nullius was empty land ready for economic development. Moreover, he made it seem as if Native Americans underutilized the land. This was not true, but it helped take away legal claim from them. Jackson photographed their homes as abandoned, despite families living in them. He also excluded the rest of the towns from images, making them look like isolated holdouts. Jackson and the Geological Survey discovered ancient pueblos just outside what is now Mesa Verde National Park. When he published these discoveries, he described them as remnants of a civilization fallen from grace. While Native Americans may have deserved to own the land when they had great civilizations, he argued that they lost the mandate to the land. Jackson presented all of this at the 1876 Centennial Exhibition in Philadelphia. The models of the pueblos and artifacts at the Indian exhibit made Native Americans seem as if they were a people of the past, vanished from the American story and landscape. Advertising white settlement. Now that white America believed Native Americans to be extinct, they could develop the American West with little guilt. Railroad magnates, hoteliers, and captains of industry hired Jackson to photograph development in and beyond Denver. He was paid large sums to support tourism and migration for the rich, and he published photographic travel books for those wealthy enough to own them. The American West was no longer a natural landscape where men roamed free. It became a touristic attraction for rich Americans trying to escape the industrial East. For poor Americans wishing for a fresh start, the mines were open, and oftentimes dangerous. Jackson illustrated what development and proper use of the empty and unused land should look like, an image his photos helped create. Remember, Jackson was paid to glorify development, and this settler colonialism was a more challenging and corrupt process than his photographs would like you to believe. The previous sections were concerned with ideas. All of these aforementioned racial biases led to the project of Western development and settler colonialism. If Americans believed Native American nations and peoples had a right to the land, then maybe today's map would look very different. But that is not the case in our timeline. The ability to other Native Americans was a show of power by white America, and they profited economically by expelling, killing, and limiting Native Americans to live on reservations.